One. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Holding Court with the Empress of WeHo. My name is Enoch Miller, your Empress of West Hollywood, and we're so excited to have you with us today. We are joined by my extra special guest, one of our newly elected city council members, Mr. John Erickson. Hi, John.
Hi, Enoch, or do I have to call you Empress?
You can call me whatever you want, Boo. It's all it's all good. I just love being able to call you Mr. Council Member now.
Aw, thank you.
It's so exciting, and also it's just been really amazing because, like, first of all, you were one of the youngest candidate on the ticket for everyone, and you and Seppi Shine are two that beat out two incumbents, John D'Amico, I mean not John D'Amico, John Heilman and John Duran, who have served this city for many years, and we thank them so much for the amazing work they've done. I know you've worked very closely with John Heilman in his previous campaigns as well and stuff with him through the city. But first and foremost, what's it like now officially being sworn in as of last week as our newly elected city council member?
It's really surreal. We got, if you know a little bit about me, I already got to work right away before we even were sworn in, and even had agenda items already on the council agenda for the 7th. And ultimately that's what people elected, I think, myself to do, is to get to work right away, because there's a lot going on and there's a lot to do.
Yeah, exactly. And just to give everyone a little bit more detail about John and kind of his upbringing and some more of the details about him, because he's got, like, he's done a lot of fucking work in this city, in this community, and this man has, like, it's impressive. So you're originally from Ripon, Wisconsin is your hometown originally. So what was that like growing up there? Because I know obviously Wisconsin's a very different demographic than Los Angeles, especially West Hollywood. What was it kind of like growing up over in that area in Ripon?
I had, I had a great childhood. I grew up in Ripon, Wisconsin. It's the birthplace of the Republican Party. So it's a little different. It's the Abe Lincoln Republican Party, so a little bit different than the one we have currently. But yeah, I mean, it's a town of 7,300 and some people. Everyone knows each other's business. But it was. I had great friends. I had great family. Just a place to really call home. And I love going back there and seeing everyone, and still have many friends that live there.
Also, and I mean, since it was such a great area to grow up in, which is, you think of some place that's very heavily Republican as a little bit more conservative and sometimes controversial for queer people, growing up and then obviously discovering, oh, hey, I'm gay. What was that? Was your family very supportive, or kind of what was the reaction initially for them on that?
Yeah, so I came out in college, so I didn't come out early in life. I mean, it was pretty obvious, I would like to think. But, I had a great community and a great friend group that was always there for me, that I knew I could be really honest and open with. I had started kind of, exploring my sexuality, and my friends were really supportive of all that back home. And it just goes to show that, no matter where you're from, you can still find those people that are going to fight for you. And I think it really was true, and really true to the statement that, your community loves you for who you are. And I was able to really discover that, and really, help, I hope, educate people as well about what it means to be gay in a small little town.
Yeah, and that's honestly the hardest. I mean, I've lived in a couple places that, not 7,000, but still, like, I mean, in smaller area. I mean, the smallest was like 400,000, but still, it's really daunting when you're trying to, like, get people to understand, especially places that are a little bit more conservative or a little bit more of a red state, and it's trying to wrap their hands around the aspect that it's like, this wasn't something it just happened to be like, one day I'm gonna wake up and I'm just gonna decide to be gay. Like, this is just like, I'm not, straight's boring, I'm just gonna flip sides. Like, it doesn't work like that. So it's great that you had a really good friend base and support group through all that. So let's look a little bit at kind of, because this is what's really amazing to me. Your educational background has, I mean, it's extensive. If you have even a remote chance of, like, learning a little bit about John, learn about his education, because he has, I mean, especially when it comes to women's and queer rights, I mean, you've got some extensive knowledge in that area. Let's just go a little bit about kind of your, because I'm high school, whatever. We're going to skip to college, because this shit, girl. Wow. So you studied women's and gender studies at the University of Wisconsin in Whitewater, where you also studied feminist studies and English literature. Then studied women's and gender studies at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh.
Yep, just like the Bids, the blue jeans.
The blue jeans, love it. And then so it was 2007 that one, 2009 on the next one. In 2011, you got a master's in applied women's studies at Claremont Graduate University, and then also studied women's studies and religion at Claremont as well too, and got your master's in that. And studied LGBT studies at Claremont, where you got your PhD, as well as studied American religious history and sexuality. Damn.
Yeah, I'm often just really tired.
I mean, well, and you were doing all this schooling up through what? Through 2011? Like you were 2000, well, before 2007, but like all the way up through 2011. You were doing a lot of school. Let's start way back at the beginning. What really got you motivated and wanting to get into women's and gender studies over back in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to be a doctor in growing up. I wanted to go to med school, and I had started taking all the classes and was a part of it. But then really, I just started discovering different parts about English literature and feminist studies and women's studies, and wanted to, I don't know, something. I remember being in an English class and we were reading Toni Morrison because I was taking a Toni Morrison specialty class because that's what you do in Whitewater, Wisconsin, apparently. And it just really changed, I think, the natural course of how I saw things. I had and have amazing female role models in my life, and really things start fitting into place and wanting to change. And I think work and be an ally for feminist causes and, causes that affect all communities, we all blend together. And so I changed my major to women's studies at Whitewater. I ended up transferring schools to the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh, where it wasn't a major at that point, but throughout my time there, I worked to make it a major. So when I graduated in 2009, the next semester was going to be the first semester was going to be offered as a major. And so I was the first to graduate with the minor degree there. And then really, continue that pathway of activism that I discovered, at Oshkosh, and moving that on to my work in graduate school at Claremont Graduate University. I was the first man, to graduate with a degree in applied women's studies, from CGU. And then at the same time, I got 2 masters in 2 years. So if you want to talk about being really tired, that's will come in. And then, I really wanted to be a teacher. I kind of started training myself that I was going to go into the academy. I still am in the academy. I write and I publish in those ways. But, then really discovering this little town called West Hollywood and moving here and discovering and seeing all that it has to offer. And, and then moving back and seeing what and who I wanted to become and wanting to finish my PhD. Of which I did then, and then, working here at the city and continuing to make all the connections and, really get into the spaces here in West Hollywood that you and I both really love.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's really interesting. I love that you brought up the fact that you had a lot of really powerful women influences in your life. I read somewhere that your grandmother was a big influence and had kind of helped take you to different things of getting you to help volunteer and do stuff with soup kitchens and stuff. And then also different, obviously giving you information about, again, stuff with women. And so was she kind of a big part in a lot of that decision as well when you first were looking at women's studies?
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother, her name was Gladys, and she just, she was the backbone of my community in Ripon. She was the backbone of my family. I also had an amazing grandmother on my dad's side. It's awesome. It really came from, I was really fortunate to have really strong women leaders. My mom, my sisters, my aunts, all kick ass, in every way. We all have those stories though. So I like to think of myself as not really being that unique, but I just, have the ability to hone in on, my grandmother's story. But, she was, she stepped off the job after Pearl Harbor and joined the Army. Oh my God. And, was in the Women's Auxiliary Corps and transported prisoners of war and really did a lot in male dominated spaces. And then, she moved here and was in Wisconsin and ultimately, existed in these really male dominated spaces. And I would
Yeah.
see and I would go with her, like to VFW meetings or to go to Madison, Wisconsin, where she would talk to the governor and would
Wow.
literally yell at the governor in some she worked at our food pantry. She worked at our senior center in Ripon, Wisconsin. And, she always taught me that the health of the community is utmost importance of anything. And that comes with food, that comes with mental health, that comes with, just being together. And as a community, I learned all of that from her and in such unique ways and stories that I still see playing out through my life.
Yeah. Well, it's really, I have a similar with my grandmother. She's, Army Med Corps, like, same thing. This tiny little Hispanic lady with these, like, big, like, crazy guys. And you just see, she tells stories of just bossing their asses around. So it's like, no, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. So it's very amazing to hear these stories of these women that, first of all, trailblazed so many amazing things for not only just other females, but for the rest of our communities. And again, having powerful women that are very strong in that, it's amazing to see. And it's also, thank you, Gladys, for the amazing work you've done in building this man up and to the person he's become. So we're excited for more to come. So you're getting into school, you're doing all this stuff, and then you decide to intern at West Hollywood, kind of like you mentioned. Yes. How did that kind of introduction get? Were you specifically looking at West Hollywood city and the community to like find a place here to do some work, or did it kind of just, was it a little bit of a happenstance that kind of just fit together?
It's actually, I haven't talked about this. It was actually a really interesting story. So I was living in, I had taken an internship in New York City at the Margaret Sanger's Papers Project at NYU. And my professor here in the Applied Women's Studies program, I had just graduated and I was there and she said, oh, I know you're probably moving back, when you're done with this, but there's an internship and it's paid. So hello, at the city of West Hollywood and you should move there. Like she was like, hello, it's the gay community. Like you got to go. And she was just like, so instrumental in many ways of showing me this. And so I applied. And then the funny thing is they had wanted me to come in for an interview, but I was still not sure if I was moving back. And then essentially they're like, okay, well, we'll keep your name on file. So I completely forgot. And then about 2 weeks later, we had like made this decision to move back. And they called and they're like, hey, the internship is still open. Do you want to be considered? And I did. And so I moved right along with that one and went in for the interview and then was lucky enough to get the position. So it really has this like really interesting piece of fate to it, and really being like, oh, they kept the job open or, oh, they didn't like other people. I don't know, but I'm lucky enough that they didn't, I guess. And here we are. And I was able to stay at the city and be an intern where I, worked for years with the city council with amazing people who you and I both know and really learn, the history and lessons of what our city is, who we are, what we fight for, why we do that, and really get a crash course in that understanding of policy as well.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, I had the great privilege of then getting asked by council member Abby Land at the time if I wanted to be her deputy. And so I said yes. And that really is where a lot of changes really occurred.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I remember that's turnover from, was it Kieran?
Yes.
Yeah, she was, again, amazing. And then I think she had a baby. I think that's
why she went on maternity leave.
Yeah, she left. And then you kind of stepped in and then she was like, I got a kid. Like, I'm busy. I got things to do. So, but it was and again, Abby Land, an amazing council member for many, many years, was also the CEO for Trevor Project and an absolutely amazing woman who you still get to see walking around, doing her walks in the morning, getting her coffee. It's always great to see Abby. But yeah, so that's really amazing that, first of all, that it kind of just serendipitously worked out that way. And it was just so kind of perfect how it was all lined up ready for you to come back to WeHo and then move into this position. Did you immediately go into, because let me double check the exact name of the area you were with, when I can find it. So you're community events technician at the city. Mm-hmm. So was that the assistant position? Was the community tech with Larissa and everything with that?
Yeah. So Abby didn't run for re-election.
Right.
And this was 2014, 2015. I can't
Right.
remember. It seems like forever ago.
It feels like forever
And it
ago.
is forever ago. So the city actually created a new position around community events. It was
Okay.
something that I've been doing previously in my work. And I applied for it, and I was lucky enough to get it. It was the city's first ever community events technician position. So that
Awesome.
worked directly with Larissa, who you're mentioning,
Yeah.
but ultimately was out there in the community dealing with our neighborhoods,
Yeah.
our community groups, organizations, a lot of events, being at the Pride booth, being
Yeah.
everywhere that we would be, and
Gone
really,
everywhere.
taking events and like taking policy that the city really championed and turning it into applicable programming,
Right.
events, things that people could really get their hands on and learn more about and take action for.
And were a lot of these ones like some of the things you see around like summer sounds and things like that? Were those like some of the different things you worked toward putting into like place throughout the city?
Yeah, so a couple of great examples are obviously the West Hollywood Women's Leadership Conference,
Right. Which is
which,
huge.
is an incredible conference that goes on
Yeah.
every year. It's really one of the only, and was one of the first boutique conferences here in West Hollywood. But some of the reasons why West Hollywood is so incredible with how we promote leadership or whatever we do around that topic,
Right.
is how we take a grand idea and then we put pressure in that space and then we see the results. So for example, we wanted to get more women on boards and commissions.
Right.
And so how did you demystify that whole position? How did you demystify the process? And so putting that in place throughout the conference and then seeing not only the number of people come every year, but then the number of people apply and then the number of women and men, all people who, are from West Hollywood that would look and apply to boards and positions. And we really saw a huge increase. So that was one way.
Awesome.
The Human Rights Speaker Series, which is another program, where we would, talk about global ideas. So you talk about LGBTQ rights in Russia. That was one I, would be up there. Or, the HIV/AIDS crisis in China and work with our partners at the LA LGBT Center, or other issues that, we would see come up that the city could have a really unique approach on. And then those are just a few of, the countless things.
Oh, there was like every month there was a new thing. It was a lot.
Women's History Month. And like usually it was like from January through like June. I never saw the light of day. And then like July and August were kind of like whatever. And then like it really revved up. And it was a lot of work, but it was so rewarding because you saw people's lives change. You saw people get involved in their community and say, I want to be involved. And, it was really great to, put your blood, sweat, and tears in that stuff.
Well, and especially with a place like West Hollywood, I really appreciate what this community does. It really lends itself to each individual in group or community in so many different aspects. Like you really feel represented here throughout the entire year. They try and hit on so many different issues and not just that, but history and cultural aspects like Russian Heritage Month. They do a lot of stuff with that. Obviously, Women's History Month, there's a big that. They do stuff with seniors. There's just such a broad diversity, which is so great. And again, events and programming and things that you can tangibly go and experience and get to meet individuals in these categories that sometimes you don't typically get to see anywhere else because a lot of places, they kind of just jumble everyone together. They don't really give them an opportunity to kind of highlight what they're great at. And I feel West Hollywood does a really good job at like picking out the specifics on certain things and really giving them the place to shine and the platform.
Yeah.
And so coming into the city, getting to know like really the inner workings, because when I started working in the chamber, that's when I really started to understand.
I remember when you worked at the chamber.
I know that was a minute ago
too.
I
mean, you were never little because you're very tall, like
right.
I remember you.
But yeah, it was so crazy. Like my wide-eyed, bushy tail walking into the city for the first time, going like, "Oh, WeHo's this great, crazy, glamorous thing," and I'm like, "No, there's actually a lot of shit that goes into the background that is like hard, dirty, bloody." Like, it's just like you put so much effort into so much of the behind the scenes. I think a lot of people don't really appreciate how much the city works and the intricacies in that. And that's what I feel like I really appreciate, especially the business community. A lot of the stuff that the different neighborhood organizations do to really protect, like again, neighborhood watch stuff with other things like that. A lot of people don't realize how much goes into the behind the scenes. For you, what was kind of one of the more not necessarily eye-opening, but like one of the more things like, oh, I didn't realize the community did that kind of experiences you had when you first started working kind of really in depth in West Hollywood?
I mean, ultimately, I think some of the best things about West Hollywood are the things that go really unpublicized in so many
Right.
ways. I mean, you look at the involvement of our boards and commissions and how we have really dedicated people that shape so much of
Oh my
what's
God.
around us,
Yeah.
from art to culture to policy. I
Yeah.
mean, the city of West Hollywood was the first city in the country to have a transgender task force, now our
Right.
transgender advisory board, as well as our lesbian and gay advisory board. I mean,
Right.
historic things done at times when it was not cool to do it.
Right.
From a national policy standpoint, but West Hollywood's always led the way. I mean,
Mhm.
people don't realize that we are the first pro-choice city in the
Yeah.
nation. It was a part of the pro-choice cities campaign that Councilmember Abby Land, of course, pushed through. Um, to say here in West Hollywood, reproductive freedom and access to safe and legal abortion is who we are. And that's exactly why we honor and commemorate Roe v. Wade every
Yeah.
January and the work that we do. So those are some of the things. But ultimately, I think, and I know it's pretty well known, but I think one of the reasons why West Hollywood serves in such a unique way is our work with our sober and our addiction community. I mean,
True. Very
we
true.
do so much work with individuals and put so much money into really thinking about recovery measures, how we can help and be there for our recovery community and our sober community. That
Right.
the work and the money that we spend really does save lives. It
Yeah.
really helps people. People think and come to West Hollywood, and even though they don't live here,
Right.
they claim this space as their own because this is where they can feel safe or they have their community. And I think that's really beautiful and
Yeah.
and so unique. And ultimately, one thing that I'm so proud of is the ways in which our business community themselves really rally behind, I think, efforts that the city does that
Yeah.
are more grand thinking. And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is when I had the pleasure of serving as Abby Land's deputy when we passed the nation's first gender neutral bathroom
Yeah.
ordinance. And I think you were still at the
Yeah.
chamber
I was
then,
at the
and
chamber with that. Yeah.
the chamber really came out in support. People came out in support.
Oh yeah.
And, businesses themselves would be like, oh, great, another regulation or another thing. They were like, we want to do this. This
Yeah.
is exactly who we are.
Yeah.
And that type of connection, especially now during COVID, when we need to help our community in every way, shape, and form get back and
Right.
get the help that they need, I think speaks volumes to not only our city government, our city manager, our city
Yeah.
staff, which I was one of them, as you know, but
Yeah.
ultimately, I think what type of a model city we represent in terms of public policy and how we can really help people.
For sure, and I think that's a really good point of bringing up again the stuff with again gender neutral restrooms, the business community, especially because we sat on so many different meetings with the businesses, and the businesses were like, "Well, yeah, of course. Like, I mean, this is yeah, we've wanted something and like a lot of things, but it's just like it was just kind of this is what it was, this is what it was based on policy, and now like they were like, oh sure, all it was is I got to switch a sign, sure, easy peasy, not a problem.
That's literally all it was, too. And
Yeah,
like, oh, I just have to take, and what it was for listeners at home, it was taking single stalled restrooms and making
right,
them gender neutral. And
exactly,
that, while we hear from these right wing cuckoo nuts that, whatever it is, right? But ultimately, what it is it helps not only our transgender community, it helps members who are disabled, it helps
yeah,
parents with opposite sex children so they can take them to the restroom. I mean, it applies to so many different communities. And that's why I think West Hollywood has always had that special place of showing other cities how to do things and how to do them right.
right. And it's so, and again, it's really showing that it's not a big deal, and how not like again, it's not just a city creating an arbitrary policy to just get behind because we want to like make headlines. It's not. It's creating something for again a lot of people we would hear from the transgender community saying it's a safety issue.
Mhm.
It's them feeling not safe and not secure walking into a restroom that someone might have an issue with them not representing whatever someone wants to call their birth gender or some bullshit, and having being attacked or verbally assaulted or like accosted in a public space. And it's like you just want to go use the restroom, have no one bother you, and be done. You're not there to cause a scene. And this was so many people from the transgender community were like, thank you for finally respecting our like just Art,
It's
health,
really
and
just
safety.
about peeing at the end of the day. So
Well,
I mean, it's really just about
exactly.
using the restroom, which is just why
Exactly.
it's so hysterical. But yeah.
Exactly. But that's the thing is like it's the city taking initiative to really think about not just the overall needs of the community as a whole, but really the individual needs of every specific aspect of the community, from the biggest demographics to the smallest. And that's what I think West Hollywood does a really good job of, not just focusing on the masses and really kind of breaking it down. Because when you think about it, especially the queer community, we are minorities on top of minorities on top of other minorities. And to really kind of just show equal representation, I feel like the city really does, as best as their ability. Obviously, no one's perfect, but to the best of their ability, they really try to give everyone equal representation, which is, again, I know we're kissing our city's ass a little bit. You're welcome, Paul. But
I mean, well, I mean, that doesn't mean that there's not more work to do. I mean, there's
oh, of
always
course.
ways in which we can make things more inclusive. And, I think that's what this election or other items really help us look
Yeah.
at how we bring in new blood to the city to continue a long-standing tradition and history that we all know. Because, we have these ways in which we talk about progress, right? Like, and you see this in the campaign, like, make the city more progressive. And I always say, like, well, the city already was progressive.
Yeah.
So, like, continue that long-standing tradition,
right.
or redefine how we look at progressive, or
right.
redefine how we look at inclusive. And also, inclusivity means something to me. It doesn't mean something to someone else.
Right.
And we all have to, I think, work together in that way.
Yeah, and it's a really a lot of it's like education, it's communication, it's a lot of communication, and really just making sure everyone feels heard and feels like, hey, you've at least listened to it. We're going to do our best of our ability to make something at least potentially accessible or whatever. And I feel like the city does. I mean, yes, it's not 100% perfect. There are times you should see meetings between the city and the chamber. Believe me, no one always agrees. However, they do sit and really work hard to iron things out and to come up with something at least mutually acceptable for all parties involved. So yes, we have a lot of work to go. But yeah, West Hollywood, I feel, has already been and has continued a pretty decent legacy of inclusivity and diversity and things like that. So moving on to my next big question, because this is what everyone wants to know. Why West Hollywood City Council?
Why was Oh, well, I mean, I thought it was going to be something so nefarious.
No, it was not nefarious. I just
That's
wanted to make
really
it shady.
I mean, like, I don't know.
Da, da, da.
Look, I mean, I love this city. This city reminds me so much of my hometown, Ripon, in so many ways.
Oh, awesome.
We all, I mean, West Hollywood has our characters.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like everyone knows everyone in West Hollywood. There's, 36,000 people, but with like 500,000 opinions. And maybe that's a low number.
That's pretty close, I think.
Yeah, but West Hollywood is a home to so many. I mean, so many people who fled persecution, who fled families that might not love them, who needed some place to survive, who want to live here because we fight for affordable housing and build it, actually. But I chose West Hollywood to live because it's exactly the community that I want to be a part of. And when I decided I wanted to run for this seat, it's exactly the community I want to fight for and want to be a part of, and make sure, people know that at the end of the day, I really just want to help people. I want to help people. I want to listen to people. And I want to make sure that, I go to bed every single night. And this is crazy. I want to go to bed every single night exhausted because I'm trying to do so much, right? And if you know me, Enoch, you know my work ethic, ultimately, what we have to do. And right now, during a global pandemic, when people are out of business, they can't pay the rent, every issue that's before us, people sit there and say, oh my God, you were crazy to run for office. And I say, no, this was the perfect time to step up and lead. People don't tell you when it's your turn. People don't tell you when it's time to be the leader. And, I had an amazing community and group of friends that, believed in me when I did not believe in myself, and really helped push me to continue to fight. And I think ultimately, and I said this, like, I think 2 days before the election, when every doubt comes into your mind,
of course.
Did I do enough things? And I said to a dear friend, I said, I just really want to help people. And I said, I want to serve because I want to help people, I want to help our community, and I want to get to work. And I'm so blessed, and thanks to all the voters and everyone to put me in this position. And like I said on, last week when I got sworn in, it's that, I promise to work every single day to make sure your lives are better. And if you know a little bit about me, I don't make promises I can't keep.
Yeah. No, you're not one to say something. I think it's also with you working in the city of West Hollywood, you get very like not necessarily conditioned, but you get don't say anything, you can't back up because that shit comes back to bite you. It really does. And these people, you think these people aren't paying attention. They pay attention to everything. John knows this specifically, but I'm like, anyone out there that thinks like, oh, the residents don't pay attention, bitch. Like,
and there's a certain group, and they'll comment and they'll let you know how they feel. But ultimately, I think, that's the part of West Hollywood that I love the most. I love that we have a city that doesn't rest on its laurels.
Yeah.
We have a city that, pushes you and will tell you when you're wrong, even if you not think you're wrong.
Right.
But, I think that's the beautiful part of our democratic state of, West Hollywood. It's that, I think we're all fighting for the right purposes. I mean, now, how we define those things obviously are
well, right.
But I think ultimately at the end of the day, we all want to get to the right place. And this new energy of the city, I think, in the election, both nationally all the way down to the local level, I think really in a different type of understanding of what does it mean to serve and represent your community that you love. And are you going to do it when everything's on the line? And everything is on the line right now.
Exactly. And I do, people that didn't realize this, our election, we had almost 80% voter turnout. Like it was 78 points, 79 points. We had almost 80% voter turnout, which is unheard of. Usually we get maybe 20. Like this was amazing.
Yeah,
it's so bad. Well, and that's not even just our community. That is across the board when you think about it. And I really hate to say that. I mean, thank you, Trump, for making people come out to vote. But it took a person like him being in office for us to realize we need to get our shit together. And we need to really, when we want someone in office, we need to go and vote for that person we want in office. Regardless of whether you think your vote doesn't count or doesn't matter or anything like that, going out and vote is so important and is so, like, again, just pivotal for again, if you want change and you want effective change to happen, that is how it happens. And like we have seen just like not even, what is it, 24 hours? Like we have a new president of the United States, elected officially, electoral college has put in their vote, all of it officially, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Thank God, because again, when we actually put our minds to it and put stuff to it, it fucking works. And don't ever think your vote doesn't count. It does count, and it makes a big deal, and it matters. And that is my platitude for today.
One of my good friends who ran for Culver City Council, who would have been their first LGBTQ member, Freddie Puzzo, lost his election by 17 votes.
Wow.
So it just goes to show, and in West Hollywood, this is an important fact, is that, statistically, well, not statistically, historically, we've always had our elections on like a random Tuesday. March, off your election where no one comes out. This is the first year, based off of a law that was passed, where our elections municipally were consolidated with the presidential. So you're automatically going to see huge turnout numbers. I mean, it was insane. I mean, usually it takes 6,000. Usually we see 6,000 people vote Hollywood total, which is horrible.
What is dismal.
But ultimately, now we saw upwards to 24,000 people vote West Hollywood, and that's beautiful. One, because we know they live in West Hollywood, so get involved. Two, they actually know they live in a city that stands for so much and that can do so much, and they can really be a part of this change, right? I talked to you about the number of people I've had the amazing honor to speak with that say, I want to get involved, I want to do this, I want to do that, and I'm like, let's go. Like,
there's so much. There really is. There's no, and that's the thing is too, there's no excuse not to get involved in this community. There is so many different outlets for you to get plugged into, from getting like just crazy overworked with so many different things to volunteer with, to really niching yourself and like finding some like one or two things you can do every year. It is so easy to get involved and to be involved in this community. I mean, like there's no excuse at all. And so let's talk about a little bit about your platform and some of your initial plans that you wanted to do. like topics of like what your goals for the city were and kind of some of the things that you have. These are all listed also on his website. You can go check that out. But so let's kind of like, so we'll kind of just bullet point through them, and then you can kind of give us just a little bit about what you kind of were thinking of when you kind of listed these out. So the first one you had on the site was protecting renters' rights. So kind of what was kind of the synopsis of that aspect for protecting renters' rights?
Well, West Hollywood is, 73-74% renters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, renters here decide a lot. We're a really dense city. We're one of the densest cities in America, but one of the densest cities in California, as we all know.
Yeah.
We're 1.89 square miles, so there's 36,000 of us. So we're squared and shoved in ways. Ultimately, West Hollywood was founded on renters' rights, protecting renters' rights, making sure landlords know that they can't come in here and get everything, right? But ultimately that the city is going to stand behind renters. So not only knowing and making sure people understand, especially during COVID-19, their rights as renters, and knowing that they have rights to appeals and to hearings should anything occur with their landlord, but ultimately they have so many rights based on our rent control ordinance that, say they can get carpeting and painting, and I mean, all that people don't know. But then, how we're helping renters during, the times where they can't pay the bills, the money that we're giving to organizations so people can apply and get that rent paid for them, and then this kind of falls into how we build more affordable housing. How do we keep our existing housing stock completely safe and controlled so that way people can move into it? And how do we work not only with our county partners but with our statewide partners to make sure that there's a balancing, an equitable balancing of public policy when it comes to housing? And I think what we've been seeing come out in a lot of ways from what's going on in Sacramento, from what's going down on here in the local level. And I saw it as a planning commissioner, where I sat on the planning commission for a number of years, but then ultimately now as just a policy nerd in general, seeing the need to talk to people. Because, a one-size-all solution does not work, especially for places like West Hollywood. But we have to be involved in that situation as well. And renters' rights have to be. I'm a renter myself. I live on the east side over here. I'm the only member of the city council that lives on the east side of West Hollywood, which is so funny because we're only so small, but I live east of Fairfax. That's essentially what that means. But I think when we understand what renters' rights look like, it's understanding that people know that they have a city that's there to back them, and making sure they get out those one-on-one services now more than ever.
Well, and going into services, the next aspect you talked about was city services, which there's a lot of different aspects of the city services we have. Again, everything from aging in place stuff for seniors, stuff for people that need like rideshare stuff, other things with food, mental health stuff, public health stuff. So there's lots of different aspects of that. So what kind of were your focuses wanting to be when it came to city services?
So city services are the lifeblood of really what our residents come to know. Whether you're getting a parking permit or paying a parking ticket, I'm sorry. I've been there myself.
Same.
Knowing that you can call an actual person is critical. So city services, when it comes to renters, calling someone in our housing division and saying, hey, my landlord is saying I owe all this money, I have all these, what's going on, and knowing that they're going to back you up. When it comes to planning and land use, when we look at how things are built, knowing that you have a voice there. And then ultimately, I think when it comes to all the social services that we offer, from homelessness to food insecurity, which is something I'm very passionate about and pushing forward, and we'll have some items in the upcoming agendas in the next few months, to Metro card transportations. You worked at the Chamber when we offered, in partnership with you all, discounted Metro cards, tap cards for our seniors. That's huge, and that type of ways in which we can help ease that burden, how the government can actually work for the people, versus the other way around, right? But then neighborhood compatibility, neighborhood safety, street lighting, these things that I think our residents and our businesses know that we offer. Opening a business in West Hollywood is challenging. So how can we help further ease that burden? A business liaison position, for example, or what we do with our code compliance officers who work extremely hard to go out there and deal with all the complaints from noise to everything going on, as you and I both know. Because people call.
And they call at all hours of the night.
All hours of the day. And ultimately how we can make sure people are being heard and then not getting some wraparound. And unlike other large cities or cities in general, the best thing about West Hollywood is you can say, oh, you can fill a pothole in a day, right? In other cities, it might take a lot longer. And so those are the things that are really important to the city and city services that I know really well because I worked there for 6 years. I know exactly how the quote unquote sausage gets made and why it's so critical for so many people.
And it's very, I love that you mentioned the puddle thing because I always joke, like, you can always tell when you leave West Hollywood, the roads go from beautiful to crap, like that. Do you know where our borders are based on our roads? It's actually really funny. So the next aspect you kind of bring up was a more sustainable city and kind of what specifically, because I know it's like you were talking both in like personal and like professional aspects of that, but like what exactly does a sustainable city mean for you?
Oh boy. Well, if we think COVID-19 is bad, let me introduce you to my friend of climate change.
God.
This comes from clean air to safer streets to getting people out of their cars
right.
to more green spaces to, dealing with all of these aspects. So I think when we look at the impacts that COVID has shown, where does it come to in terms of a growing world that, is having resources that are dwindling? So,
right.
And ultimately how we can help curb that as a city. So sustainable development, LEED certified buildings, creating more green spaces as part of development projects, parks, pocket parks. I live over here by Plummer Park, which is an incredible park. And, West Hollywood Park, and we have other little ones around the city, but how we create more. How do we create more spaces for our dogs? But then ultimately, how do we get people out of their cars, and walking? If I have not had to drive my car for a really long time, which is great. But, fossil fuel emissions and carbon emissions are the leading cause to climate change and what we do. And so how can we make a more walkable and sustainable city for clean energy and clean ways in which we really look forward to, I think, leading the way on that,
And West Hollywood has done a lot of that. Like, we are looking at different things with like having developers put in electric car plugs and outlets and stuff for those types of vehicles, and encouraging those types of vehicles and people that own those types of stuff to come and live in the city. I know they do a lot of stuff when it comes to green aspects of like buildings and how they do materials, and like encouraging developers to do different things that are more green or environmentally friendly. So and stuff with lighting as well. So I know there's different things the city already currently has. So I'm curious to see how you are going to take some of those things and run with it in the future. Another thing, which I know is this is actually very big for that has been a big passion of mine, but also I think a lot of people feel the same way in West Hollywood. Crime-free streets, safer neighborhoods. No matter how amazing the city is, we are unfortunate still to have things happen like crime, from anything from petty larceny to full-on things like where we have the Ed Buck issue with full-on homicides and different stuff like that. So unfortunately, no city is perfect. So what are some of the aspects you want to work towards when it comes to especially like public safety and safer neighborhoods?
Well, with the passage of Measure J at the county, I think, and what we look at and when we finally acknowledge, the severe racial disparities that we've not only seen here in West Hollywood, but throughout the world and country through the summer and beyond, it's ultimately how are we reimagining public safety? That's the exact word. And how are we not only working with our neighborhood groups, our community members, but how are we creating a more just and equitable space to make sure that people from all walks of life feel welcome in West Hollywood?
Right.
And I think you see this in the ways in which we deal with our sheriff's department here in West Hollywood, because we contract with the sheriff's department, and ultimately how we deal with the larger sheriff, the main sheriff, who we won't talk about, but in many ways.
She will not be named.
Yes, I wish I had a fan. I would have been happy. But now is a moment that if we don't meet it and understand, how are we appointing more diverse boards and commissions, things are very white. I myself, as a white cisgendered gay man, am no better if I don't appoint diverse board and commission members and work on social justice and racial equality and see how I can be an ally through all work that I do. But ultimately standing there in solidarity and passing the mic and knowing it's not going to come back to you. That's really critical. And ultimately, I think leading through and by example, right? And I think I'm really glad Measure J got passed so overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to see people like Supervisor Holly Mitchell get elected to the Board of Supervisors, and other bills that have passed at the statewide level to really deal with this moment of not only racial justice, but how do we make sure that West Hollywood, which has always led the way in so many aspects on things that needed a voice or a champion, how are we doing that? And I think I'm really proud of my colleagues. I think we're going to really tackle this together and work together, and also in West Hollywood, public safety, is imagined because we've had a really different relationship with our law enforcement officers, and how they've dealt with transgender sensitivity, LGBTQ sensitivity. I mean, all of these things that they do here in West Hollywood that they actually don't do in other places.
Right.
So how do we make sure that the contract that we have with the sheriffs is fully executed, or how do we work and reimagine and give more power back to our community to police themselves? And that's stuff that I'm dedicated to doing when it comes to protecting our streets, because when something does happen, you want to call and get help. And ultimately, how are we doing that?
Exactly. Well, it's also like giving people security in the people that the city is hiring and having as our, again, security and protecting our well-being. And it does, I mean, for anyone who's never been to a national night out, really go, and because you get a chance to speak one-on-one with the people from the sheriff's department, people from the fire department, and really get to know the individuals that are your beat cops, the people that are there on the day-to-day that actually are in and assigned to your neighborhood. And if you haven't ever got a chance to experience one of those, I mean, it's obviously a national event, but West Hollywood does a really good job with all 13 different areas. A lot of people don't realize there's 13 different neighborhoods here in West Hollywood too. There's a lot of different areas to West Hollywood that have different aspects, from the community watch to block by block to the sheriffs, and then everything else in between. There's a lot of stuff that actually the city does that's really great. That you're right, a lot of other cities, quite frankly, most other cities.
You're mute. I can't hear you anymore.
Hollywood. Oh, sorry about that. Got a weird little glitch there, but yeah, it's really amazing to see what the city does for, again, that already what they do, and now obviously with Measure J and a lot of the other things that they're working toward to help improve that. It's just really exciting. Next topic: keeping West Hollywood moving, which, oh my God, is going to be a challenge, I can imagine.
Yeah, well, this is, everyone's favorite thing. It's traffic, but it's ultimately how do we make our streets safer? I tell people who bike in West Hollywood, they're some of the bravest people I know. I would never bike in this city.
I've done it. It's scary.
On Fountain Avenue. Fountain Avenue is one of the most dangerous streets.
The worst.
One of the first items I'm going to be bringing forward next year is redesigning and reimagining what Fountain Avenue is like. Because I literally, this past weekend, saw another horrific accident. Whereas certain people during the campaign said West Hollywood, Fountain Avenue is completely safe. Insert eye roll here. I have to say, what street do you live on? Oh, that's right. You don't live on it. That's right. You use it as a freeway, and you use it as your own personal highway to get to and from. So keeping West Hollywood moving is about bikes. It's about micro transit. It's about scooters. It's about safer streets and bike lanes and all of those things that help and enhance businesses when people can walk by a business and bike on it. And it's also connected to climate change and so many other things that we do. And so I think when it comes down to the ways in which our city is looking at traffic and transportation, then it ultimately is the big one that we all talk about. And it's the Metro Crenshaw Northern Extension to West Hollywood. I mean, that changes the game. That changes the game and how we look at development, not only in now, but in 4 to 10 years when a train is going down Santa Monica Boulevard, up San Vicente, maybe, if that's the route they choose. Whereas I could no longer have to drive to work at my day job where it's downtown, and I could get on a train and read or something, right? Or emails, which I probably would do.
Yeah, you probably would. But I mean, it's having a connector to, I mean, Hollywood and Highland, where, I mean, obviously the main hub for our area is, and not, again, it's sometimes, like, as I take the bus every day, it's having to go from the 704 to the 217 to like all these other different areas. And like, when you can just have a one-stop shop that just takes you right to it, and then you don't have to worry about, and then it connects you to basically everywhere else that it gets. I mean, that's so funny when you look at the city and you look at a topographical map of our transportation, like metro stuff. The east side is pretty extensively kind of like got all the stuff going on when it comes to metro. You look at the west side, it is anemic and it is so just kind of like out of place with that. So I'm really hopeful for that. I did have someone on here just ask a really quick question. Jordan David wants to know kind of how do we decarbonize West Hollywood, and I think that's a really broad question because there's so many different aspects to work toward. But like, in your opinion, John, what do you think would be your best way to maybe answer that question for someone?
Well, decarbonizing West Hollywood, and hi, Jordan, is a top priority. I mean, it's ultimately getting people out of their cars. It's ultimately making sure the streets are more walkable. It's getting more safe and protected bike lanes that are installed, not only along Santa Monica, but Melrose and Fountain, and then other streets that need to be down here. Promoting walkability and how we work with our business community for them to emphasize amongst their workers and prioritize public transportation over private cars. How are we electrifying our grid and working to make sure that we're not only creating clean power, but then getting clean power to people that want to invest in electric charging vehicles. As we all know, Governor Newsom has put the kibosh down on combustible engines, and so people are going to have to be all electric, and so that means a lot for our electric grid. So then ultimately then for a lot of buildings that have cars, how are they able to, if they have older cars or if they get a new car, how can they charge at home, or relying then on city charging stations, which we see and we install for them to be able to use. I mean, they're in public spaces, they're along Santa Monica Boulevard, we're having more. But updating and looking at our electrical grid is going to be huge as well, and how we can really, decarbonize and really get people not only out of their cars and into the streets, but ultimately how we're doing it at home. And then what does that look like in terms of development, I think is a big question. And then ultimately how we're connected to the Clean Power Alliance and what we do there with the community.
And I think it really is a big, like, it's a trickle down effect. It's like working on these overall policies and finding ways that, I mean, they impact the infrastructure aspect, and then how that goes from the infrastructure to development and all the stuff up there, and then trickles down to the rest of us here at home, and then how we take that. So I do think infrastructure is a big component to the decarbonization of aspect of it, and it's working on those like overall policies and procedures for like developers, for metro, and for all this stuff like that. And bike lanes obviously is a huge thing. And so, I think it's West Hollywood does do a really good job, especially the aspect of creating power charging stations. I don't think many cities have where you can go down the street and you can find like 3 or 4 places that say, hey, you can charge your car here. And I see a lot of people use it, especially the one in front of like IHOP over there by La Cienega. So it's definitely, the city is working towards. I've sat on a couple meetings with, I don't think it was Planning Commission. I think it was just one of the other city departments, but they were talking about how they're working on putting in older buildings and rent-controlled buildings that don't necessarily have the exact infrastructure to build out all this stuff, but finding ways to create power charging stations and getting access to the grid through that, even though it's an older home and an older apartment. So, I mean, the city is working on a lot of really unique ways to do it. But yes, there's more, obviously, we can work toward. And then you've mentioned it a little bit, but obviously helping the unhoused or homeless initiatives that we have here throughout the city. A lot of people may not realize West Hollywood is one of the few cities that put actual money toward homeless issues, and is one of the few cities here in California. I think Santa Monica is another one, in Venice, that actually put real money towards homeless issues. So our community does a lot for that. But John, kind of, what's one of your or some of your different perspectives on how to help house the helping the unhoused? Sorry.
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to get them into housing. I think as simple as that. Obviously these issues are multifaceted. It's getting them into housing, but then it's also dealing then once you have a roof over your head with other issues that come up, mental health, all of these other issues that
drug abuse.
Drug abuse, sobriety, previous issues that stop you from getting housing. So many people, I worked at LAX, and we were dealing with the homeless population and the unhoused community in an area that was being redeveloped. We wanted to get them into housing and get them into permanent supportive wraparound services. And I cannot tell you the amount of people that had such erroneous tickets from being over policed that stopped them from getting into a shelter, from getting into a center, from getting into a service of some sort. So getting those tickets cleared because they're
ridiculous.
Both of them are pretty off the walls, right? But that stops people. Also, something people don't even realize, it's, how do we make sure people can use the restroom? How can we make sure people are bathed and clean? And, animal control is another one. People have pets, and some homeless shelters and centers and whatever we do don't allow animals. And that's super important to them. And that's something that's super important to all of us as a very animal-friendly city. So how are we supporting animals in this way? And so, when we look at West Hollywood can solve homelessness. West Hollywood should be a leader and can be a leader on this. And it's multifaceted. We have to work with the county, but ultimately our partners in the city, from Beverly Hills to then Los Angeles, our friendly little small suburb to the north, south, and all around us, to combat it, and as someone who's always participated in the homeless account, which sadly isn't happening this year because of COVID, and ultimately how we are getting the supportive services to our homeless members is critical. And I think this also goes back to a main point of, we don't need our sheriffs responding to homeless situations. I think when you are experiencing homelessness, your brain and your brain chemistry changes because you're in this fight or flight mode. There's been more studies about this, but ultimately we need people that are responding to homelessness that are trained to deal with these issues. Is it housing? Is it a social service? Is it something else that we need? You should be the ones reporting. So our MET teams are critical to that, our mental evaluation teams. But then how do we go a step beyond that? And then ultimately, when it comes down to the intersectionality of homelessness itself, West Hollywood is a huge LGBTQ community, but we see more transgender and transgender women of color facing homelessness or poverty. So how are we making sure that the city is itself providing money to those those providers to be out there doing this work? And so it doesn't just start with one thing. It's it trickles down, right? But we need to attack it all at the same time. And I would love to see how West Hollywood can continue to lead the way. And then it also is changing the narrative about homelessness and housing, right? We see, and you see it all the time, people come to meetings and they say, I really like that project. I really like the project. I just wish it was on another side of town. And, it's a little too big. And you just, what type of people are going to live there?
That's the one that gets me every time, where it's like.
And if you watched 2 planning commission meetings ago, I went off on an individual who said, we can't have
those people.
We can't have homelessness or people that are in affordable housing. They're going to be driving around the circles, driving around the neighborhood looking for parking, doing drugs. And I was like, what the hell? This, but it's also changing the narrative from a very privileged city understanding and realizing that we are who we need to be as a city to lead the way on these issues.
Exactly. And that's the biggest thing I've had an issue with when I've seen multiple, not just planning commission, city council as well, where you see people come in and they're like, oh, well, if we have these people come in and they're going to be putting down our property values and they're doing this, it's like, no, excuse me. No, it is a whole aspect that this is, again, providing housing for these people. So that way there is no issues with this. And again, I'm really happy for places like the LGBT Center just down on Highland that is an amazing job with, again, over I think 200 something rooms for providing it for senior and youth homelessness and being able to provide housing for them. But yeah, I definitely agree. West Hollywood could be a really big spearhead on that. And quite frankly, when you think about it, the last homeless count, where was 100 homeless registered in West Hollywood. There's not that many, and we could really set an example. And you're definitely right, John. It's a tiered aspect. It's having professionals at each tier that are trained in that specific level. They need to either mental health, something with medical, something to do with drug abuse or drug addiction, and even having maybe someone who's an ex-homeless individual who can go and say, hey, here's what I did. Here's the services I looked at. Having someone who knew the way and could actually help pave the way again for someone else. There's so many different aspects to getting all these different people involved that understand it and know it and really are the professionals. And like you said, we don't need the sheriffs responding to every homeless call. They aren't needed for it. And honestly, it's a waste of their time, but it's also a misuse of resources, and we don't need to be doing stuff like that, and really need to be giving them the actual help they need. But yeah, it's a it's a lot of work. It's a process, and I cannot wait to see if there's one thing you really hope someone takes away from the work you're trying to do, and if they want to come and approach you. What's one thing you hope someone takes away from if this interview or just meeting you in person from that interaction?
Call me, text me. I don't know. Get involved. I want you to get involved. I said this in the meeting. Reach out to me. My Twitter and Instagram handle. I'm on all the social media. I'm not on Pinterest anymore, so I apologize. But reach out to me. If I can't get you involved here, there's someone I know that probably I want you to get involved with. I want you involved here because we need a lot of work.
Right.
I really encourage people just like myself in finding the city. Let's get involved. Let's work on this together. We might not always agree or come to the same solution, but we can create change. And I really want to do it with a group of people ready to, fight for what's right.
Yeah, exactly. And again, congratulations, John. And we are working also to have Miss Seppi Shine, who is our other nomination to the West Hollywood City Council on as well. So she will be coming on here hopefully in the next week or so to get you more information about her and details. Again, amazing work that she has done. She is also the second lesbian woman to be on our city council in the last 30 years, which is, again, amazing. I'm just like, queer community, we are rocking it out, ladies and gentlemen. We are kicking ass, taking name. But again, an amazing woman, and really cannot wait to have her on as well, too. But John, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Always good seeing you and hearing from you, my dear.
Thank you.
Of course. Oh, always. And everyone go check it out. Again, it's on the screen at Erickson85. You can go check him out. And then I think if it's not set up already, Erickson@weho.org. You can email him there at the city. It's very easy. First initial, last name at weho.org. Check them out. And again, get involved, people. Go visit weho.org for all the different information you can find out. And again, if you need something, say something. The community is there to help. And our city council and our city staff are amazing individuals that work tirelessly to help you. If you see something going on, make sure you find a way to say it, because if it's not going to get done if no one knows about it. So, but thank you again, John. We will catch you guys next time. Y'all have a good evening. Bye.